Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, sir.
Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Libya. Libya is back in the news again. And something that Glenn Greenwald wrote was interesting. The headline has the U.S. intervention in 2011 in Libya was such a smashing success that a sequel is coming, obviously being as cynical as possible. But that's what they're up to. They're up to bombing again. They're in the midst of it now. And, of course, early on, there was, in 2011, they killed Gaddafi. There was a claim of great victories. But right now, one of the questions that did come up, and they were interviewing Joseph Dunsford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, about where does this authority comes from. And he said the president made it clear that we have the authority to do this. So do they really have the authority to do what they're doing?
Well, in the announcement yesterday, the Pentagon spokesman announced that we are starting airstrikes in Libya at the request of the Libyan government, which of course was created by the UN. And he was asked, he also said there's no end in sight. And he was finally asked, this was later in the press conference, he was finally asked, where do you get the authority for this? And I think it's even worth, even though it's a short clip, I think it's even worth playing the clip just to listen to what he claims.
Nancy.
Under what legal authority are these strikes being conducted?
Under the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, similar to our previous airstrikes in Libya.
And I'd like to go back to previous questions because I'm not very clear.
So what he's saying is that that the White House claims that it has the authority under an authorization for force in 2001, but Libya was not involved in 9/11. That was only to go after the people who did 9/11. Libya was not involved in 9/11. And ISIS did not exist in 2001, and in fact, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are sworn enemies.
Of course, if they go by precedent, they would have it because they've been using this authority off and on now, for 15 years. So it's a perpetual authority to wage war. But it's not so simple as just saying, well, I think the Congress is always AWOL, and I'd like to see Congress resist this. But it's not so simple to get Congress involved because you don't know what they'll do, because they're not going to take a constitutional position on this. But, even back when they were going into Iraq, I wanted to make that point and had them vote on a declaration of war. And of course, nobody supported that. They didn't want the responsibility for it. But they grab hold of things and they'll use it. And if you had a decent Congress, there would be resistance. They would say, no, absolutely wrong. You don't have the authority, and we're not going to give you the money to do it.
Yeah.
But what are the odds of that happening? They're not even going to debate it. Do you know of anybody in the last couple of days in the Congress has made a statement, about this? It's almost like they don't even know that it's going on.
No, I don't. And also the propaganda is so strong. ISIS is presented as such a bogeyman that if that word came up in the debate, everyone would cringe into silence, but nobody would question what is some small groups in Libya fighting for control of a city. How is that possibly related to our national security?
And the main reason is neither side will admit what motivates ISIS. And of course, the motivating force is our foreign policy. Like you said, there was no ISIS and Al-Qaeda, in a lot of places, but it built as we got involved. Matter of fact, the origination, even our policies in the 90s, was a motivation for 9/11. But they will not admit it because both of them are warmongers. Both of them cannot even take the position that we shouldn't be there, and they keep doing it. So what do they do? They create conditions that are hectic and difficult, and Libya is a mess. So they have to escalate. So it's the complications of our previous problems that motivates our people to we have to go in there and really bomb them this time. Maybe we just didn't use enough bombs last time.
Yeah, and back to the government in Libya, the previous government, the Gaddafi government, was not democratically elected according to U.S. norms. That's a given. However, the whole reason for the overthrow was to give the people back their voice. Well, this current government is not a reflection of the will of the people in Libya. It was brokered by the UN in Tunisia. They couldn't even get into Libya because they didn't dare enter their own country. When they finally entered Libya, they had to stay on a naval base for many months. It was actually only last month that they were finally creeping out of the naval base, and this is the government cobbled together by a foreign power.
Yes, and this is seen exactly as that because it's the Westerners, it's the Europeans, it's the Americans that come imposing a government. Now, a lot of people are still pretty naive that the UN is an independent force and not the puppet army or that unit that gives us the so-called moral authority to go ahead and do this. So just because they're in there and they're supposed to have a peace commission and feed people and take care of people and settle these wars, they do exactly the opposite. But the people who are on the receiving ends of our bombs or on the receiving end of the UN policy, they see this as an invasion and an affront to their sovereignty. And guess what? It's a great recruiting tool. And the recruiting, but they'll come up and they say, well, we just killed 10,000 here, 10,000 there. But why are we so worried then if we've been killing them like crazy? Not realizing that the more you kill, the more you're going to get, because the more families that are involved. And now we have a mess. Remember, Hillary was ecstatic about the initial bombing in Libya. She thought, well, this is just wonderful. Her positive attitude and excitement, it faded, but it didn't faze her. And it doesn't faze the neocons, no matter how unsuccessful they are. This euphoria of a success of killing bin Laden or Gaddafi or overthrowing a government in Ukraine, it's forgotten. And I didn't consider what Hillary said at the time very exhilarating, I'll tell you.
And look at, exactly. Her reaction, Muammar Gaddafi was raped and murdered on video. And she laughed and said, we came, we saw, he died. She thought it was absolutely hilarious.
And that's what that part of the world sees. That's the American leadership. They're doing this. And then you have people still, I'm sure we're still very much involved in torture and secret prisons and all, but to be up front and say, we need to torture and we need to kill families and we need to kill civilians because these are vicious people. And they are vicious people. But that doesn't mean that doing the thing that creates vicious people should be done even more so.
Double down.
Yeah, double down and get more vicious people, more people who hate our guts.
Yeah. And, a couple of things that struck me as I was watching the press conference yesterday. The spokesman was very proud of the fact that these bombing raids launched yesterday took out a tank and a couple of trucks. Can you imagine how many millions of dollars in missiles, in manpower, in training, in fuel went into this bomb to shoot down the tank and a couple of trucks? Probably $20,000, $30,000 worth of equipment.
And when this argument came up about authority and all, we have a war powers resolution passed after Vietnam War in 1973, and they pretend that they're supposed to follow this. It was a terrible piece of legislation because it actually legalized war, but they still pretend that they obey this. And when they were asked about that, they said that the president's position was there have been no hostilities there. So the war powers resolution come into effect. What it means is, I guess we don't have 10,000 troops there shooting and killing, but we have special forces. We have the CIA involved. We have a government that we installed, and we're bombing and killing people now. And I'm sure there probably is going to be a little bit of collateral damage, but is there an indication, well, we have to do this just to rescue somebody and it's going to be over in a week? They have already warned this could go on for a long time, and the war has been going on for a long time because as far as I'm concerned, this is one continuous war, just as I argued that World War I and World War II was one continuous war based on some fallacious thinking. But we've been in constant war. That the preliminary was prior to 9/11, and since 9/11, we've been very, very aggressively trying to remake the Middle East, and I'll tell you what, we've been pretty good. We have remade the Middle East. It was horrible before because it had already been remade by Western powers and had all these artificial countries. So we've been in there for 15 years, killed a lot of people, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and we're still remaking, but no hostilities. We're not going to have any hostilities.
You know, people might ask, well, why now? Why all of a sudden? I think this has been building up for a while. Remember, I think it was about a month ago that there were a lot of demonstrations in Libya because some French troops were killed, and that exposed the fact that the French were actually fighting on the ground there. So I think this is building for a while. And when I was thinking about why now, two things came to my mind. The first has to do with Gaddafi himself. His son, as you remember, was taken prisoner during the revolution by one of the militias. He is the heir apparent, Saif Gaddafi, educated in London, viewed as more urbane than his father. But he was held for all this time. He was released secretly in April. And as now people have started talking about him, the movement that his father represented, whether the U.S. likes it or not, was enormously popular at the time, and is even more so now when people see what followed it, the disaster that followed it. So he's actually making some inroads. And I think particularly the bombing of Gaddafi's hometown, Sirte, which is what was hit yesterday, I think there's at least a symbolic message there: do not go backward, because that would be a huge black eye to the U.S. To go back to what they had before. And the other thing, and you'll probably see this as well, is political. I think this is a way for the administration currently to pull chestnuts out of the fire for Hillary, because nobody's going to talk about Hillary's disaster in Libya when we're fighting ISIS in Libya. And how dare you question this?
Yeah, and I think the Clintons know how to do things politically. I remember when Bill Clinton was in trouble, they had these Monica bombs, and we had our government doing some bombing. It had nothing to do with national security, and the people on the receiving end of that knew darn well what it was all about.
Yeah, that's true, exactly. And it will, I mean, it's clever. I mean, they're not stupid people. This will put Trump in an uncomfortable situation, because if he condemns these bombings, he'll look like he's in favor of ISIS. So it will. Nobody will be talking about Hillary's disaster, and Trump dare not question this, or he'll be soft on ISIS.
That's right, and I think this is a demonstration on why a little clearer position of non-intervention is better. Because if you're an interventionist and you have to respond and you have to bomb and you have to do all this, but in a different fashion. So in spite of the positions being somewhat different, they're both interventionists. Mm-hmm. I mean, Trump has said some things that sounds like he may have more common sense, but at the same time, he's an interventionist, but he doesn't talk softly when it comes to ISIS for the political reasons that you're talking about, because the American people will not tolerate it. But, I still think there are a few people out there. I keep going back to the Democratic Convention on applause for an anti-war position. I keep thinking that it couldn't have been more difficult during the presidential campaign when I had the confrontation with Giuliani. Yeah. And there was a lot of support out there. Sometimes the people just are waiting to hear what they're already thinking, or they're thinking, and it seems to be so out of context of what I hear on television, which it is. And so they can't say it, and they're afraid to think about it. And that does influence, the politicians, and they keep moving in that direction, of a softer position, saying, well, maybe I can, once I'm in office, I can change that. I can bring our troops home and do these things. But unfortunately, it seems like we get ourselves into trouble. If getting rid of Gaddafi was a panacea, and Hillary had been right that we'd change the government, get rid of Gaddafi, and everything would be okay, it'd be a little more difficult to argue. But where are the successes? I mean, even if we wanted to be very, very generous, in the last 15 years, I don't know whether how many people we actually rescued. Sometimes the rescue missions are all fictitious anyway. We're off to rescue somebody just as a justification to get involved in another war.
But I think you make a great point that there are people out there that see things this way, and we want to grow those people. And if you'll indulge me, Dr. Paul, for half a second, it brought to mind something that I just announced to our followers today, which is our conference in September is designed to bring people together and to start this movement. We just announced today one of our major speakers who will be joining us, and that's Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who is a huge name. We're so thrilled to have him. He was Colin Powell's chief of staff in the run-up to the 2002 war, and he came to realize this is the greatest mistake of his career, is sitting by and watching the neocons ram this war through. And I've seen Professor and Colonel Wilkerson speak many times. I spoke with him at a Houston Peace Conference last year. He's a powerful speaker. He's a Republican against war, and he's got such a great message and such a great story to tell. So I know you're looking forward to seeing him too.
You know, and they always argue, the opposition or those who are moderate, to bring people together. We want to bring people together, and we don't like ideologues. We don't like, progressives who are against the war, and we don't like those libertarians that are against the war. We want to bring people together. And I think the wonderful thing about non-intervention, whether it's non-intervention in our personal lives, in the economy, and on foreign policy, it's exactly the way you bring people together without sacrificing any of your principles, because some of our close friends are progressives, and we applaud those people who have a more sensible foreign policy. It's just so hard that their perceptions that politically they can't say it, and therefore, they're stereotyped. But I get annoyed when people say that, it's the ideologues that we can't stand. And yet the ideology of interventionism is an ideology, and then they have free reign. We're involved, we're interventionists, and we can intervene any way we want in the economy, any place in the world, and we can intervene as we please on personal habits, and we can use political correctness to defend our civil liberties. It's all nonsense. That's why I happen to believe in the purity of ideas. Not that I think we'll reach that. We're not going to get to that. The communists never got to perfect communism, and as they approached it, the worse they got. So no, we don't approach it, but you have to have an ideal. You have to have an ideal to move forward and move in that direction, or what you do is you get in the middle and you sacrifice all your principles, whether you're coming from the left or coming from the right. And you come together and you don't have anything. And that's what we're witnessing today. A mess in our economy, a mess overseas, and we certainly have a mess with this defense and understanding what civil liberties are about, with this obsession on political correctness where people go in jail and ripped out of school for minor little things that they have said and done. I mean, we are, on a course that is unsustainable, because they will not define liberty, and they will not accept the goal, at least the principle to believe in, is non-aggression. Don't use aggression against people. Can you imagine how wonderful the world would be if most people took the oath and followed it and said, look, I will never initiate force to get what I want, and I'll never use the government to do it. Of course, that's idealistic, but it certainly is a better ideal than what the world is run by today, and certainly what runs this country. It's worth working for and worth trying to understand it better. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.